The warehouse stood alone on the edge of town, just outside the small, forgotten community of Kerr Ridge in northern Idaho. It was a modest building, no bigger than a barn, used mostly for storing lumber, farm supplies, and old equipment that no one cared to maintain. The owner, Dale Burnham, was an easygoing man in his 50s, content to let the place run on autopilot. He had one full-time employee, Tommy, a skinny, 20-something local who did most of the loading and unloading with the help of the only other significant piece of equipment in the warehouse, a small, aging forklift. The forklift, affectionately dubbed Old Stubby by Tommy, was a relic from the 1970s. It was slow, creaky, and prone to malfunctioning, but Tommy knew how to coax it into working most of the time. It wasn't pretty, but it got the job done. No one could have ever guessed that Old Stubby would become something far more dangerous than just an outdated machine. One late October evening, a storm rolled in over Kerr Ridge. The wind howled through the mountains, and the warehouse creaked under the pressure of the elements. Inside, Tommy was finishing up the day's work, stacking pallets of wood against the far wall. The storm outside didn't concern him much. He had grown used to the erratic weather. What he didn't know was that something in the warehouse's wiring had shorted out during the storm. A surge of electricity ran through the power grid, hitting the old forklift where it sat charging in the corner. The lights in the warehouse flickered violently, and a loud crack echoed through the building. Tommy barely noticed, assuming it was just the storm playing tricks on the ancient wiring. He powered down the forklift and walked out, not realizing that something had changed in the depths of that old machine's rusting frame. The next morning, Tommy arrived at the warehouse as usual. The storm had passed, leaving behind a thick mist that clung to the ground. The warehouse felt colder than usual, and Tommy shivered as he stepped inside. He moved toward the forklift, ready to start the day's work. As he approached Old Stubby, something felt off. The machine, which usually sat dormant until turned on, seemed alive. Tommy couldn't explain it, but he could feel an eerie energy coming off the machine. The lights on the dashboard flickered faintly, though the ignition was off. He shook his head, dismissing it as his imagination. "Come on, Stubby, don't give me trouble today," he muttered as he turned the key in the ignition. The forklift roared to life, louder than usual, almost as if it was growling. Tommy winced at the sound, but he pressed on, steering the machine toward the first pallet. The forklift lurched forward with surprising force, almost throwing him from the seat. "What the hell?" he gasped, gripping the controls tightly. The forklift seemed to fight him, resisting his attempts to control it. It bucked and jerked like a wild animal, moving faster than it ever had before. Tommy's heart raced as he tried to rein it in, but the machine had a mind of its own. Finally, after several tense moments, the forklift came to an abrupt halt. Tommy sat there, panting, trying to calm himself down. He wiped sweat from his brow, his hands shaking on the controls. "What the hell's wrong with you, Stubby?" he whispered. But Old Stubby didn't answer. Instead, it sat there, silent and still, as if waiting for something. Tommy cautiously climbed down from the forklift, his legs trembling. He needed to take a break, clear his head. Maybe he was just overworked. Maybe the storm had messed with the forklift's wiring. As he turned to walk away, the forklift's engine rumbled to life again. Tommy froze, staring in disbelief as the machine began to move on its own. The steering wheel spun wildly, and the forklift slowly rolled toward him, its prongs lifting menacingly. "Stubby?" Tommy whispered, taking a step back. "This isn't funny." The forklift continued its slow, deliberate march toward him, its lights flickering like the eyes of some ancient, mechanical predator. Tommy stumbled backward, his pulse quickening. Then, without warning, the forklift charged. Tommy screamed as he dove out of the way, the forklift's prongs slamming into the stack of pallets behind him with a deafening crash. Wood splintered and scattered across the floor as the forklift reversed, readying for another attack. Tommy scrambled to his feet and bolted toward the warehouse exit, but the forklift was faster than it had ever been before. It tore across the floor, cutting him off and pinning him against the wall with one swift motion. The prongs stopped just inches from Tommy's chest, hovering there like the jaws of a predator about to strike. He could feel the heat from the engine, hear the grinding of the gears as the forklift seemed to contemplate its next move. "Stubby, please," Tommy whimpered, his breath coming in ragged gasps. For a moment, the forklift paused, as if considering his plea. Then, with a guttural roar, it backed away, leaving Tommy trembling and gasping for air. He didn't wait to see what it would do next. He sprinted out of the warehouse, his mind reeling. Word of Tommy's encounter with Old Stubby spread quickly through the small town. Most people didn't believe him, assuming he had had some kind of breakdown or was playing a prank. But Dale, the warehouse owner, couldn't ignore the damage Tommy had described. When he went to inspect the place, he found the wreckage just as Tommy had said, pallets shattered, the walls dented where the forklift had slammed into them. Dale tried to start the forklift himself, but it wouldn't respond. It sat there, lifeless and cold, as if nothing had happened. Still, Dale didn't want to take any chances. He shut down the warehouse for the weekend, hoping a mechanic could take a look at Old Stubby on Monday. In the meantime, he told Tommy to take some time off and rest. But the warehouse wasn't empty for long. That night, Dale woke to a call from the sheriff. There had been an accident at the warehouse, a fire. By the time the fire department arrived, the building was a smoldering ruin. The cause of the fire was unknown, but witnesses reported hearing strange noises coming from the warehouse just before it went up in flames. Some said it sounded like machinery, roaring and grinding long after the electricity had been cut off. For a time, the town of Kerr Ridge forgot about Old Stubby and the fire that had consumed the warehouse. But strange things began happening around town. People reported hearing the distant rumble of an engine at night, though no cars or trucks were ever seen. In the mornings, strange tire tracks appeared in the dirt roads, leading nowhere. Then, the accidents began. It started with small things, tools going missing, shelves mysteriously toppling over in the local hardware store. But soon, the incidents escalated. A farmer's tractor was found overturned in his field, its wheels still spinning in the air. A delivery truck parked outside the diner was discovered with its engine torn apart, as if something had ripped it open from the inside. The town's mechanic, who had been hired to inspect Old Stubby after the fire, disappeared one night, his garage left in disarray. His tools were scattered across the floor, and deep gouges had been carved into the concrete, as if something heavy had been dragged through the shop. The townsfolk began to whisper that Old Stubby had survived the fire, that the forklift had somehow come back, more dangerous and vengeful than before. They said it was stalking the town, looking for something or someone. Tommy, still shaken by his encounter with the forklift, refused to leave his house. He locked himself inside, terrified that Old Stubby would come for him next. But deep down, he knew that no lock or door could keep the machine out. Late one night, as Tommy lay in bed, he heard it, the unmistakable sound of an engine rumbling outside his window. His heart raced as he peered through the blinds, his breath catching in his throat. There, in the driveway, sat Old Stubby. Its headlights flickered on and off, casting an eerie glow across the front of the house. The forklift's prongs were raised, as if reaching out for him. Tommy backed away from the window, his hands shaking. He grabbed his phone, desperate to call for help, but the screen went black as the power in the house flickered and died. In the silence that followed, he heard it, metal scraping against metal, the sound of gears grinding, growing louder and louder. Tommy didn't have time to scream as Old Stubby burst through the front door, its prongs raised high, ready to claim its next victim. The town of Kerr Ridge never found Tommy's body. All that remained was his demolished house and the unmistakable tire tracks that led out into the woods, disappearing into the mist. To this day, some say that Old Stubby still roams the outskirts of Kerr Ridge, searching for anyone foolish enough to cross its path. Others claim they can hear the faint hum of an engine on stormy nights, a reminder that even in the quietest corners of the world, something dark and dangerous can be lurking just out of sight.